welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by the author of a spooktastic collection of short fiction. It is so much fun. There is just a wealth of really good scares and also like really interesting information about folklore and the world. So let's hop right into it. Welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Anastasia Garcia. I'm originally from South Texas, but I've been living in New York for about 10 years now. My day job is working in marketing. I work at tech companies like YouTube, Instagram, and now I'm at Pinterest. This is my first book. And in 2024, this year, July, I published my first book, which is Ghostly, Ghastly Tales, an illustrated collection of short horror stories for children and young readers. So age range of like 8 to 12.
It is so much fun, and it really speaks to like the inner child in me that was raised on Goosebumps and Fear
Yes.
Street and like all these really great horror things for kids and young teens. Before we get too much into the book itself, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your journey to the book. What was the inception point? And if you could also talk a little bit about your book club, fiction
Yeah.
addiction, I would love that too.
Yes. So in 2020, I can tell myself I've always been a writer. There were so many things that I was collecting and drawing and illustrating and jotting down through my whole childhood as I read scary books. And about 2020, in the pandemic era, everyone probably went straight to their hobbies to find something to do while they were stuck at home in the dark. And that was me. Late at night, I decided I wanted to start writing and actually publishing. So right about then, I started publishing short horror stories for adults, truthfully, in print anthologies and in podcasts. And right about that time, through an organization called Ladies of Horror Fiction, which encourages like writers, women writers in the horror community, I found an editor who worked for a different editor who was like, I have a publishing house called Gibb Smith. It's a small publishing house out of the West Coast that's interested in making a short, scary story book for kids. And I was like, this is a calling. I hadn't written for children before, but I was like, I think I can take some like adult scaries and turn it down and turn it down a notch for kids. And so from that, I pitched him a couple of ideas, and one of them was a collection of stories based on folklore from around the world, which has always been an interesting topic for me. And so we started writing. The process took, I'm not joking, like a year and a half to like get all the stories out, to get them edited, and then even longer, maybe 6 more months to actually get the book printed and bound and ready to ship. So it took quite a long time. And then fiction addiction, to jump into my book club. So in about 2016, around the time I had just moved to New York and got my feet settled, I decided I wanted to look for like-minded friends. As an adult, it's so hard to find friends and community that you kind of have to build yourself. And so I was like, I would like to gather up some women, young women generally in the area that are interested in just like reading books, talking about difficult topics. And so I thought that it would be great to create like a safe space for women and non-binary folks just to have a place where we can talk about specific books, specific topics, specific things that interested us in a space that was like inclusive and exciting and fun. So I made it very regular. I think we would meet every 2 weeks. We'd read a new book, all kinds of things. And then it slowly made its way towards like horror and mystery. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. I kept it running for quite a long time. We're just now petering out. I actually made transferred over to a friend of mine who's been with the group since the beginning. But we had wonderful authors even come through, like Amor Towles, the author of Gentleman in Moscow. He came through. There's a couple of others that came by to like sign books and do little chats. So it blossomed into a beautiful group of people.
That's awesome. I really love that. And I imagine, it must feel really rewarding as a writer to also be like cultivating readers and supporting other writers. And just like it sounds like a really lovely sort of like just good vibes experience, like, and creating a safe space to talk about difficult things like the world needs that. That's really cool. And I love the story of how this book developed. And I'd love to ask more about how you sourced your tales. They're drawn from a wide array of global cultures. And it really prompted me to think about how, like, fear is universal, but like horror can be culturally specific.
Yeah.
So, yeah, could you talk about your research process, like what drew you to certain tales, and like if anything you found surprised you?
Yeah. So actually, folks out there who are interested in spooky stories may remember Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark trilogy. And then there's also another collection around the 80s and 90s called Short and Shivery, which is another collection of short horror stories. Those were based in folklore. Actually, they were one of my favorite stories for kids. So I was like I was the academic kid in the library trying to find the original sources. And so I started there, truthfully, as like a ground zero, and then I could start branching out into a maze of topics. I started reading books and just like taking in as many of the stories as I could. And then some of them would start to like, ooh, this one's interesting. Ooh, that one's interesting. And it touches exactly on what you're talking about, in that some of these stories are hundreds of years old, but are still terrifying to this day. And those are the ones that I kind of honed in on. I liked the idea that fear is universal to us as human beings, but also there were some things that just make their way through the generations of scary stories that we still tell, and still find their way into movies and TV and shows and books and all kinds of things that we consume nowadays. So that was me trying to find like really great stories that I liked and then bringing them through into a modern day. And then it was a little backwards engineering as well, where there were some ideas that I just already had and was like, wow, they showed up in a play in a source from 100 years ago. Like this connection is crazy. Let me pull them together, and make and like tell a little bit more of like the origin of some of these scary things.
Cool.
And some of the things that I found too, like I think my most like some one of the things I was looking at was like where around the world had like the most compelling or new to me stories. And I will spotlight Japan. Japan has some truly, I mean, they're completely on the other side of the world of where I'm from. To people on the other side of the world, it might be totally familiar to them. But to me, this was new, exciting, kind of creepy and eerie elements that I wasn't sure that I was totally new about. Specifically, things like hair. Hair had like a really creepy and eerie pervasiveness in their stories and tellings. And so I brought that through in one of the stories in the book. But yeah, they have all kinds of ghosts and ghoulies that are totally different than the ones that I'm used to hearing from my native South Texas.
Wow, that's awesome. And it's so interesting too, because it's a great way to encounter a culture in a way, like through what it considers scary or how it constructs horror, because, you can see like the unique elements of a culture, but then also connect with it because you're like, oh yeah, I'm scared too. So
Yeah.
it's a really interesting way to sort of like meet the world. I love that.
I will
Um,
also say that I think, to me, books. I was a huge library kid as a child. Read hundreds of books as a kid, and to me, and I thought it was super important to include various cultures in this book specifically, so that even if you never travel to these like remote regions in the world that I'm describing in the book, you can through the pages of the stories. You can enjoy them. You can experience them. You can be introduced to things you've never heard of or seen. And hopefully this either tips off some curiosity to explore more. Maybe you see these places in person one day. But I just think a book is so unique in that way and that it can transport us to places and specifically young children who may not be driving to Antarctica or Japan anytime soon, but can have a chance to explore.
Wow, that is a great point. Yeah, and even explore like, historical cultures.
Mhm.
The notes section at the end is so, so interesting, and it gives some really cool background on like what drives the stories and also like, yeah, great directions to sort of follow your interests and what might, spark curiosity in you. And that is so important for kids, I think, like so much learning feels mandatory or obligatory. So
Yes.
like when you create these opportunities that are like they willingly enter into. That's magic.
Yes. Yes.
Mm. So I really love horror for children in general, like both because I remember it fondly, like in a nostalgic way, and because I just appreciate that it is like bringing more people into the horror community and introducing them to like the love of reading and all these really great things. I'd love to know more about your approach to scaring children. Is it a challenge? Is it harder than adults or easier? Because in some ways, like kids are scared of more stuff than adults are. Like they're scared of the dark or like the boogeyman that might be in the closet, but they also accept more weird stuff than adults do. So, like, what is your approach? How does it shape that?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. I actually think adults are more scared of things than children are. I think children have very basic fears, safety, love, acceptance, isolation, dark. Like those are very basic things, but those still scare adults.
Sure.
Now adults also have this layer of scares like, oh no, money, work, life, love, all kinds of things that just like complicate life. So truthfully, to me, scaring kids is e not easy. It's just like it's more pointed. All of us are scared of very much the same things. Those core fears are the things that I think I amp up in all of these stories, so that hopefully they even resonate with older readers too. So teens and adults, if you like to read something like this, it really draws you back to the things that were simple and scary. But as a kid, talking about things that really scared me as a kid and to me, I didn't like two things when I was a kid reading scary books. Was one, I didn't like being talked down to or treated like a baby because I thought I was such a big kid. And then I didn't like happy endings. So I didn't when the same things that scare adults scare kids. And so to me, kids are dealing with quite a lot in the world. They deal with death, divorce, change, isolation, bullying. They deal with so much. And so not shying away from like the really scary parts of life. I think kids really enjoy this, or at least I did when I was a kid. I shouldn't speak for all children. And so just like giving them a little space like this, that's generally safe and approachable, and you can close the book if you get too scared. It just helps them kind of like tackle some of these difficult topics, but in a simple and fun way, hopefully. And that way they can slowly build their confidence, their bravery, their resilience in a safe way. You can close the book, you can walk away, deal with it later when the lights are back on. Or if you're fully brave and you want to try it all, you can read them all in one dark night. But it gives them options, it gives them flexibility, and it gives them a safe space, hopefully, to tackle some of the difficult topics. And then happy endings. I truly didn't like happy endings when I was a kid. I was like, that's not real life. It's not fair that like at the end of a really scary situation, everybody goes home totally happy. I thought even if someone survives a scary story, they're totally changed for the rest of their life. So I always thought Goosebumps was a little bit for babies because I was like, get scarier. But it definitely, I mean, it's obviously a book series for children, and it's approachable in that way. I'll
Mm.
say that's also why I put in the book little fear meters. Each story is rated 1 to 3 on a scare factor. So there's a 3 all the way at the end, super, super scary. 1 being very approachable. So if you feel like you can dive in deep, you can read all of them. Start with the threes. If you feel like you just want to tiptoe in, you can always start with 1. So hopefully this makes this book like readable for a range of kids and approachable.
I do love the rating system. It's super interesting. And I think like I love something that also encourages you to read a short story collection out of order. Because I think like speaking from, just personal experience, like it's very easy for me to get on autopilot and just read something like cover to cover. But it can be more interesting and more of like a unique sort of like curated experience to do it in your own way. And I think the rating system really encourages that. What did you structure your rating system on? Like, did you have certain criteria for like this, this automatically garners a 3, like, you know?
Well, I will say my rating system is apparently controversial because there are kids now who are like, that wasn't scary at all, and it was a 3. Truthfully, it was like a lot of adults read through some of the book, and like I have a writing group that read through some of these stories in their early stages and helped me kind of like start bucketing them into categories of scary. One story in it called The Drums of War, which is based on a girl who takes a field trip to a battlefield and maybe slips back into time. And this deals with the idea of Civil War medicinary, which was very archaic and terrifying at the time. So there's a little bit of gore in there, more so than any of the other stories. So I rated that a 3 because I was like, I had friends that were like, gore, absolute no, totally zero. I will not approach it. So I need it to be a 3 so that I don't read it first. But to me, I was like, it's not that scary, is it? And then I have kids that are like, that's awesome. I want to read it. So it definitely is a range. And then some of the like ones are more like spooky, like ooh, eerie. There either is like a ghost visible or there's some kind of like eerie feeling and there's just an uncomfortable, unsettling like ambiance that pervades the story. So it's a little bit more of a feeling story than it is a jump scare with spooky monsters. And then some of the ones that had like really scary or that are the ones that I consider like ultimately frightening. Truly frightened me even as an adult. So that's how I tried to organize it, but I feel like kids are going to have their own versions of what's scary to them.
Yeah, that's great. And that's so interesting. Is it tied at all to like your points about endings? Because I'm absolutely on board with you there.
Ooh.
I think that like kids are sometimes cannier than we think they are, and they can tell like when a happy ending feels false, you know?
Right.
And some endings are like straight up very scary. A lot are just like sort of ambiguous and like
Yeah.
lack an element of closure that is scary in its own way. Did that
Yeah.
affect like the rating system at all, or?
Not the rating system per se, but that's definitely kind of, I wanted to make sure there was a mix of that. There was a mix of a happy ending, like, okay, we wrapped up, everybody's safe, it's okay. I wanted some to be like, ooh, the monster one. I won't say which ones, you'll have to kind of pick and choose. And then yes, you're right, there are some that end a little ambiguous because I thought I hoped the reader would essentially like put their mind themselves in the story and make a decision either way. I think it went like this. I think it went like that. To me, the story ends that way. And maybe that helps with the context clues, like they're reading through and there's some hints that maybe it won't end the way you think it will. And they can kind of then formulate it like, a discussion on their own or with their friends on what they think happened at the end.
Nice. I do love that. It makes it really rich for discussion too. Like if you had a really brave teacher, who wanted to
Yes. I did, I did, I did make some teacher reading guides in case there's a teacher out there who's like scary stories. Yes, my kids are ready.
Oh, love that. Is there a story that scares you the most in the volume?
Yes, I will say something that I mentioned earlier, is like things that really scare me is when something seems very familiar, but is actually quite like there's either a heel turn or there's something that shows you it's not what it seems. And so there's a story in this book called Something's Wrong with Mother, one of my favorites. A girl is misbehaving and her mother is leaving for a business trip. So when her mom leaves and then returns, she's somewhat different. And so there's like an element of something that's supposed to be so familiar, so safe, so happy, your mom. And all of a sudden, because of actions you've taken, cause something to happen. And maybe she comes back not who you expect. And I loved this idea. It was terrifying. It actually was inspired by a short story that's over 100 years old from the Victorian era. And I was like, they were scaring kids 100 years ago with this. This is terrifying to me. So I pulled that through in a more modern day story of a mom and her daughter who live in a flat in a new part of town. So it was hope that one scared me the most. And then I'll give you a second one, which is Little Playthings. Little Playthings is essentially a child sneaks into a toy shop where there are these like clockwork mechanical creations, and he stumbles upon the toy maker, the mysterious toy maker who makes these. And this is actually based on 1700s clockmakers who had originally, back in the day, clockmakers was like the premium technology of the time, like the AI of the
Yeah.
1700s. And the way they showed off their creations of like grand clocks, small pocket watches, was they actually built small children that are mechanical children that did things almost as lifelike as real children. For example, one of the children could play the organ, so you could sit them in front of a little organ and they would play multiple songs with their little fingers. Others, if you put a pencil and a piece of paper in their hand, they would actually draw different objects and different things. And then the third one actually wrote whole letters. So you could put like a goose feather in their hand and they would actually write letters from start to finish. Truly terrifying to me.
Yeah.
At the time, I'm sure it was the coolest thing they'd ever seen. But to me, I was like, this is frightening. So I took some of that from horror history and I mean, our original history that seemed horrific to me, and I put it into a short story. And I love these two because I spent so much time line by line making them feel a certain way. So I hope beyond just the spook and the scary, they have an ambiance that you can feel.
Oh, absolutely. My personal favorite is Night Class.
Oh,
Is like so just like conceptually terrifying to me. Um,
yes.
both as somebody who like is particularly afraid of ghosts. Like that is my sort of personal favorite horror zone. And I was shocked too at how old that story is, because that one you
Yes.
said had 6th century Norwegian origins. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like truly fear is universal because you can still like take these essential roots and turn them into something really scary today. It's so cool.
Yes, night class is another one of those that's like something totally familiar, going to school. But if you go to school at night, how is it different? How could it be scarier? Yeah, very simple premise that I hope like gets under your skin. That's always my favorite. I love asking people what their favorite story is. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, no problem. I think it's really interesting too, because you do point out in your intro that a lot of these folklore, they were told orally, passed down generationally, and a lot contain like morals or sort of warnings for children that would have been like relevant for their worlds. And, it might be a little bit extreme to be like, if you don't get good grades,
Sure.
I have to go to a spooky night class. But like, it's
Yeah.
a real concern. And, like, these are how it's a really interesting insight into like how children were raised through history too, like
Yes. I'm a new parent nowadays, and I think about that too. What stories am I going to tell my little one to get them to behave? But also, what stories to pass on? Like, what stories did I hear as a kid that were terrifying, but helped keep you in line until you got old enough to be like, wait a minute, they've been lying this whole time. There is no boogeyman.
yeah.
There is no monster in the water. But maybe there is. So it's kind of like playing up that fear that you had as a kid. I think from the story, I hope. Yes, all of them have like they're based on like hopefully you learn a little something from each of them or you feel a little bit. There were two maybe lessons that I hope kids take from like the whole book in general. One is that you must be smart, skilled, and a little lucky to survive to the end of your story. That's life or, any scary situation. In my stories, not all kids are listening, not all kids are lucky, not all kids are like really thinking things through, and so they might not make it to the end because of that. So kids out there, stay smart, stay sharp, stay in school. And then the second one is listen to your elders. So part of what you were mentioning, like that oral tradition passed down from older people in our family, to me, it's super important that we listen. And as kids, you think you know best, and I'm not listening, I don't need to know. But I do think it's super important that kids nowadays take a minute to listen to their older, whether it's cousins, uncles, friends, family, relatives in your life, learn from them. They have a lot to share. And just be willing to learn. Just be willing to take it all in, apply it to your life in ways that make sense. And maybe it'll save you to the end of a scary story.
Yeah, it provides an interesting toolbox just of um like tricks and strategies, I think. Like a lot of the common core of a lot of these stories is like you need to be tricky, you need to be on your feet, and you need to be a quick thinker. And like that is applicable everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, that's just surviving life.
Absolutely. I'd love to ask about not just the cover art, but the book as a whole. It is absolutely beautiful. I received like a really beautiful, like high-res digital copy, and the illustrations are gorgeous. The color is gorgeous, and I can imagine it's going to be, oh, there it is, so beautiful. Even more beautiful as a physical item because parts of it are glow in the dark, I understand.
Yes.
So could you talk about that process and that collaboration that created this gorgeous object?
Yeah, so the cover of the book, I wish I could send you a physical copy. Maybe the library will have one. You can
Oh,
check it
yeah, we're
out.
getting one.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hardcover book, and the whole front cover is glow in the dark, including the ghost, which is truly fantastic. Just like such an amazing touch from the editor and the publishing house to add. I just thought it was fantastic. Something I would have loved as a kid. So Gibbs Smith is a small publisher, and usually when an author submits a book for writing, they wipe their hands and they just wait until the book comes out on shelves, and they have no say between then and when the book gets published. Gibbs Smith actually allowed me to be part of the illustration process more than most. I originally sent over once I wrote the book, I sent over illustrators I thought would be best, but they were a little adult because I'm used to the world of adult horror, and they were like, "Don't worry, we'll send you a couple of illustrators that maybe you would like." And as I was going through their portfolios, I found Teo Skaffa. He's based in Europe and he's lived all over the world. And I noticed that Teo was different because deep in his portfolio, beyond all the beautiful children's books that he's illustrated, deep in the back, there were monsters with teeth, red-eyed floating creatures, found footage illustrations, monsters in the woods. And I was like, this guy likes horror. This guy knows scary stuff and has like a whole day job where he's building these beautiful books for kids. So I shared with him a mood board from each story, like visuals that I used when I was writing the story. I gave him a one-line synopsis of each because the book wasn't finished yet. And then a like one-line double click on each of the characters and the locations, which are very specific to each story. And he shared back sketches, which were basically a fully finished book. And I just kind of like added a little bit of notes here, notes there. And then he made this like beautiful collection of scary things that I think it's very contemporary looking. It's something that I'm not familiar with. As a kid, illustrations look so different back in my day. And I hope kids nowadays will see this. It'll look familiar. It'll look interesting and compelling. It's beautiful, full color digital art that's in the book in full glossy pages. They really printed this book to make it like super artsy. And then he built the cover, which was truly fantastic and something I wasn't expecting, but I hope is eye-catching on the shelves. I hope little spooky kids will walk into the library and bookstores and will see it and go, I need to read that. Because that's how I felt when I saw it.
Yeah, it's a perfect sort of advertisement for what lies within the pages. And I think it is like really beautiful and eye-catching. And just the whole book is just like such a gorgeous achievement. And thank you for sharing it with me
Of
and with
course.
our patrons. It's lovely.
Yes, thank you so much.
No problem. So what is on the horizon for you? Are you writing now?
Yes, I can actually share with you that this is the first in a series of the Frights to Tell at Night series. So there is a book two out coming out in the world. It will be a lot more like monsters and campfire themes, so it'll come out just in time for summer camp next year. So get excited. Yeah, so there's more. If you like this, if these are scary enough for you and you want more scary, you want more monster, there's some more coming. So there's that.
That's awesome. So it sounds like every kid's going to need that so, that they can be the coolest kid with like the
Yes.
coolest stories. It's summer.
You have to read them, study them, take them to your friends. Scare your
Right.
friends
Yeah.
at camp.
You want campfire clout, you're going to read this book. So.
Yes, yeah.
And I hope you'll consider maybe returning to the show to talk about that one because I'd love to read that one
Of
too.
course, of course. And if you're having any readings, I will be doing a reading at the Floral Park Library for any New York folks on October 10th. So if you're interested in stopping by and hear a reading, I'll have stickers, I'll be signing, I'll be selling books as well if you'd like a copy for your own. But yeah, if you have any upcoming readings coming, let me know. I'm ready to scare kids.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, yeah, thank you again so much for coming. And patrons, thank you for listening. It is now your turn and your job to go pick up Ghostly Ghastly Tales. It's a true, it's an art object. It is full of scares. It is full of just like really interesting information about the world that we live in and the world that was, the world that will be. Just so good. That's
Thank
it for
you. Thank you all
now.
so much.
Thank you too. And it is now time to close this chapter. Bye-bye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.